Growing up, I always believed in the strength of communication and transparency. My parents, though flawed in their own ways, taught me the importance of facing challenges head-on, armed with honesty and resilience. As I moved into adulthood, I carried those lessons into my relationships, striving to create a bond that mirrored their depth of commitment. When I met Rachel, I thought I had found someone who shared those values, a partner to build a life with, rooted in trust and mutual respect. In our early years together, everything seemed aligned. Rachel was ambitious, intelligent, and fiercely independent. We supported each other's dreams, making sacrifices when needed and celebrating every shared victory. Over time, though, I began to notice small cracks, moments where her words didn't quite match her actions, or where decisions were made without my input. But love, as they say, is blind, and I chalked up those instances to the inevitable imperfections of marriage. It wasn't until that fateful Wednesday afternoon that everything began to unravel. On Wednesday afternoon, I was deeply engaged in a work conference call when my phone buzzed. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number from another state, one I didn't recognize. Opting to stay focused on the meeting, I ignored the call. Shortly afterward, the notification sound signaled that a voicemail had been left. With the call still ongoing, I returned to concentrating on the budget spreadsheet I was working on, a task that had to be finished before the day's end. Nearly an hour later, I was reminded of the voicemail when the same unidentified number called again. Still immersed in my work, I dismissed the call once more. Yet again, the voicemail alert chimed. This persistent pattern piqued my curiosity, so I decided to pause my work and check the message. The voicemail was from Bay State Medical Center in Springfield, Massachusetts. The caller informed me that my wife had been admitted to the ICU following a serious car accident. They had found my contact details in their records and left a callback number for further information. Without hesitation, I felt an overwhelming urge to drop everything, call the hospital, and head straight to Springfield. Yet, as I drove, an unsettling thought gnawed at me. Why would my wife be in Springfield? Her workplace was in Hartford, Connecticut, about 30 miles away, and she had no apparent reason to be in that area. It took approximately 40 minutes to reach the hospital, where a volunteer directed me to the ICU waiting room. A nurse briefly updated me, explaining that my wife was undergoing surgery and that it might take hours before the surgeon could provide further information. Their immediate priority was stabilizing her condition. As I tried to process what was happening, a police officer approached and asked for my name. "Are you Antonio Caruso?" he inquired. "Yes," I responded, my pulse quickening. "I'm sorry about your wife," he said gravely. "What happened? Can you tell me what's going on?" I stammered, barely able to contain my growing panic. The officer explained, "What we currently know is that she was leaving the MGM Grand Casino when another vehicle ran through a stop sign and struck her car on the side. It's unclear whether she noticed the oncoming vehicle or assumed it would stop. Witnesses reported that the other car was speeding, and the impact crushed the driver's side of her car, forcing it into a parked vehicle. The airbags failed to deploy, leaving her trapped inside for a significant amount of time. Honestly, it's nothing short of a miracle that she survived the collision." I was stunned, barely able to process what I had just heard. "Thank you, officer," I murmured, still grappling with the information. The officer nodded and continued. "I'll leave you to it for now. If we need anything else, we'll reach out. Don't hesitate to call us if you have any questions." As I was about to call Rachel's family, a staff member from admissions approached me. "Mr. Caruso?" she asked. "Yes," I responded, my anxiety mounting. "Do you have an update on my wife? Can I see her?" "Not yet," she said, her tone calm but firm. "However, I need you to review some information for accuracy if possible." "Of course. What do you need me to do?" I asked, trying to keep my composure. She handed me a document. "This outlines her medical history as we have it in our system. Since all facilities within the New England Medical Group share a centralized database, we have a comprehensive record of any procedures or treatments she's undergone at our in-network locations, no matter the state. Please review this for any errors or omissions, paying special attention to medications, allergies, and past surgeries." Taking the printout, I scanned it carefully. The allergies section seemed accurate. Amoxicillin and penicillin were correctly listed. Next, I reviewed the surgeries, which were organized from the most recent to the oldest. The list included her recent vascular surgery to address vein issues in her right leg, a torn tendon repair in her left ankle, the removal of a cancerous mole from her upper back, a torn MCL repair in her left leg, a tubal ligation, and finally, an pregnancy termination accompanied by a dilation and curettage, D&C. I think there's a mistake here, I said, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. All right, let's take a look and fix it if needed. What's wrong? Something missing? No, I replied, hesitating. It's not that. It says my wife had her tubes tied 7 years ago, and around the same time she had a pregnancy termination. I don't understand. And I'm not even sure what a dilation and curettage is. The staff member turned to her computer and began typing. After a moment, she spoke again. According to the records, this is for Rachel Caruso, residing at 24 Birch Street, Manchester, Connecticut. Her social security number matches, and her spouse is listed as Antonio Caruso of the same address. But this doesn't make sense. Rachel never mentioned having her tubes tied, or an pregnancy termination for that matter. And the D&C. A dilation and curettage, commonly referred to as a D&C, is a gynecological procedure, she explained. In simple terms, it involves dilating the cervix and removing contents from the uterus. It's often done following a miscarriage or, as in this case, a pregnancy termination. This procedure was performed at a clinic in Pelham, New Hampshire. At the time, it wasn't part of our network, but it has since been acquired, so the records were imported into our system. Does it say why the procedure was done, or who was with her? There's no note about the reason. There usually wouldn't be, but it does list her sister, Ava Dawson, as the emergency contact. Thank you, I said, my voice faltering. Then I paused. Wait, can you confirm if her tubes were actually tied? This can't be right. Rachel and I have been trying to have children for 10 years. There must be a mistake. The records appear accurate, Mr. Caruso. It's highly unlikely there's an error. Can't you double check? There must be a way to confirm. She wouldn't do this without telling me. I can bring it to the surgeon's attention, but unless it's medically necessary, I doubt they perform any additional procedures right now. Insurance wouldn't cover it, and the focus is on saving your wife's life. Please, just ask. I need to know. I'll note your request in her file for the attending doctors to review, she said. I sat down, reeling. Rachel and I had always talked about starting a family, and we'd been trying for years. Now I was learning she'd had a pregnancy termination and a tubal ligation, all without my knowledge. Why? Had she been lying about wanting children? My thoughts spiraled as I tried to piece everything together. The date on the form stood out to me. 7 years ago, during our 3rd year of marriage, she had told me her sister Ava was having marital problems and needed her support for a week. At the time, I believed it. Ava and her husband Luke were known to have issues, but now it seemed like they'd used that as a cover for Rachel's pregnancy termination. Why? Was the baby mine? If so, why didn't she tell me? And if it wasn't mine, was that why it was kept secret? And why get her tubes tied? Was it so she could avoid having more children with me or someone else? The questions kept coming, each one more painful than the last. I didn't know how long I'd been lost in thought when a doctor in scrubs approached me. Mr. Caruso? Yes, I answered, looking up. I'm Dr. Patel. Your wife is stable but sedated and on life support. Her injuries are severe. There's damage to her heart and lungs, brain swelling and broken ribs, along with a punctured lung, a shattered jaw and cheekbone, spinal injuries, and a broken collarbone. I'm sorry to tell you that we couldn't save her left leg. Rachel's leg had to be amputated below the knee. The damage was simply too extensive for the surgeons to repair. However, the most significant concerns were the injuries to her brain and spine. A neurologist was being brought in to evaluate her case, but it would take several days to determine whether there was any lasting damage. Rachel's recovery would also require additional surgeries, but for now, her body needed time to stabilize from the immediate trauma. It would be hours before I would be allowed to see her. The doctor suggested I step out of the ICU waiting area to get something to eat or drink, mentioning that the cafeteria had better options than the limited choices in the ICU. They assured me they had my phone number and would contact me if there were any updates on her condition. Before the doctor left, I mentioned an issue I had noticed in Rachel's medical records. It stated that she had undergone a tubal ligation, a procedure to tie her fallopian tubes. This didn't make sense to me, as Rachel and I had been trying to have children for years. I raised the possibility of a mix-up in the records and asked if they could verify whether this procedure had actually been performed. The doctor's reaction was less than sympathetic. He fixed me with a stern look, his tone reflecting both disapproval and irritation. He explained that such a request was highly unusual, especially under the current circumstances, and that running any tests unrelated to her immediate survival wasn't a priority. I struggled to keep my composure. I needed him to understand why this was so important to me. For a decade, Rachel and I had dreamed of starting a family together, only to face disappointment after disappointment. Now I was being told by a hospital clerk that she had undergone a sterilization procedure years ago without my knowledge. The implications were devastating. I told the doctor that in his position, he would surely want answers too. His response was blunt. The timing of my concerns didn't matter. What mattered now was Rachel's recovery, and I could address these issues with her once she was awake and stable. I tried to argue that this was about more than timing. My entire understanding of our marriage and future had been thrown into question, and I wasn't even sure I could trust her answers when she was able to speak. Despite my protests, the doctor refused to authorize any unnecessary tests. Left with no choice, I returned to the waiting area, trying to process everything. I had to inform our families about what had happened, but the weight of these revelations left me feeling paralyzed. My first call was to my father. Rachel's parents had both passed away years earlier, her father from a massive heart attack and her mother from bosom cancer. My own mother had died only 2 years ago, after a long decline following a stroke. Losing her had been devastating for my father, but his role as the family's anchor had kept him strong. Rachel had 2 siblings, her older brother Victor, whom we called Samuel, and her younger sister Ava. Samuel was single while Ava was married to Luke. Both of them lived in New Hampshire, whereas my father lived nearby in Connecticut. I decided to call him first. When my dad answered, his voice was steady, though his concern was immediate. I told him about Rachel's accident, sparing none of the difficult details. He listened in shock as I explained her injuries, including the loss of her leg and the uncertainty surrounding her brain and spinal damage. True to his character, he offered to come to the hospital right away, even though it was nearly an hour's drive to Bay State Medical Center in Springfield, Massachusetts. After hanging up with my father, I decided to call Ava next, leaving it to her to inform Samuel. My first call went unanswered, so I left a voicemail asking her to call me back as soon as she could. Ava worked as a paralegal in a busy law firm, and I wasn't familiar with her schedule, so I wasn't surprised when she didn't pick up right away. About half an hour later, Ava returned my call. She was clearly shaken, her voice full of worry as she asked for details about what had happened. I explained that Rachel had been in a severe car accident and was in critical condition. Her injuries were extensive, and the doctors were still assessing the full extent of the damage. Ava offered to come to the hospital immediately, but her next question caught me off guard. She asked why Rachel had been taken to a hospital in Springfield. I explained that the accident had occurred near the casino there, which was the closest facility equipped to handle trauma cases. This seemed to surprise Ava even more. She asked whether I had been with Rachel at the time, and I clarified that I wasn't in the car with her. The conversation shifted as Ava pressed for more details, questioning why Rachel had been at the casino and whether she had been there alone. Her curiosity felt pointed, almost accusatory. I admitted that I didn't know. Rachel had told me she was going to work that day, so her presence at the casino was as much a mystery to me as it was to Ava. Ava offered again to pack a bag and come to the hospital, but I stopped her. There were questions I needed answers to first, and I believed she might have them. My insistence seemed to catch her off guard, and she became defensive, asking why I wouldn't want her to be there for her sister. I told her bluntly that I had learned things in the past several hours that didn't add up, and I needed clarity before seeing her in person. Although Ava didn't understand what I was implying, I made it clear that this conversation couldn't wait. Reluctantly, she agreed to answer my questions, though her confusion and hesitation were evident. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ava knew more than she was letting on, and that her answers might only deepen the painful questions I was already struggling to face. I interrupted Ava before she could say more. "The pregnancy termination," I said sharply. "When Rachel stayed with you during some so-called marriage crisis, she was actually with you to get in pregnancy termination, wasn't she?" Ava hesitated before admitting, "I'm sorry we misled you, but she thought it was the right thing at the time. She told me she explained everything to you afterward. Why is this coming up now?" "She never said a word to me," I replied, anger simmering. "I just found out today when the hospital reviewed her medical history." "God, I thought she told you when she got home. She swore to me she was going to tell you." "Well, she didn't. For years we've been trying to have a family. At least I thought we were. Now I find out she had a pregnancy termination 10 years ago and had her tubes tied just weeks later. You knew this and kept it from me. That's why I don't want to see you right now." "Tubes tied?" Ava sounded genuinely shocked. "She never mentioned that to me, Antonio. You have to believe me." "Why should I believe you?" Rachel lied to me for a decade, and by keeping this from me, so did you. Who else knows? Am I the last one to find out? No one else knows, at least as far as I'm aware. Luke doesn't know, and I don't think Samuel does either. Why did she do it, Ava? Was it even my child? I need to know the truth. Ava paused. I don't know, Antonio, she said quietly. What do you mean you don't know? She must have told you something. She didn't know who the father was, Ava admitted reluctantly. My stomach turned. So she wasn't sure if it was mine? Are you telling me there was someone else? Ava nodded. Yes, there was. She didn't want to risk you finding out the truth when the baby was born. There was no way to confirm paternity at that stage, so she decided to terminate the pregnancy. She promised me she would tell you everything. I believed her when she said she did. And you forgave her for this? I asked, incredulous. It was such a delicate subject, I never brought it up again. Honestly, I just thought you had forgiven her and moved on, so I kept quiet. Who was it, Ava? Who was the other man, or were there more? Ava hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Can we talk about this later? Right now, I just want to see my sister. Tell me, Ava, I pressed. Without another word, she ended the call. It was clear she wasn't ready to continue the conversation, her focus shifting to Rachel's condition. Hours later, Ava arrived at the hospital. We exchanged a brief glance but didn't speak. She went straight to the ICU nurses' station where she gathered whatever limited information they could provide about Rachel's condition. Slowly, she made her way to where I was sitting. I broke the silence as she approached. Ava, she lied to me. She had in pregnancy termination, and you kept that from me. Ava sighed heavily. Antonio, she told me she was going to tell you. I didn't see any reason to bring it up if she had already come clean. Who was it, Ava? Who was the other man? She hesitated, then answered, It was Adam Sinclair. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Adam Sinclair was Rachel's high school boyfriend, her first love. He'd lived across the street from her, and they had dated for years. I knew the basics of their history, or at least I thought I did. They had broken up long before she met me, and as far as I knew, it was a typical childhood romance, nothing significant. But clearly, I had underestimated its impact. Ava continued, her voice heavy with regret. Adam is fair-skinned, blonde, and has blue eyes, like everyone in his family. Even his cousins are blonde and blue-eyed. Your family and Rachel's both have darker complexions, brown hair and brown eyes. If the baby had been Adam's, there would have been no way to hide it from you. She couldn't risk you finding out that way. 3 years into our marriage, she reconnects with her high school ex and decides to have his child? What the hell, Ava? It wasn't like that, Antonio, Ava said, her tone apologetic. It was worse, and I tried to tell her how wrong she was, but she wouldn't listen. How could it possibly be worse? I asked bitterly. Adam was her first love, Ava began. She gave him everything, including her maid. She thought they were going to get married after high school, raise a family, and grow old together. But at their prom, she caught him having intimacy in his car with one of her friends, Barbie. When she confronted him, he admitted it wasn't the first time, just the first time she'd caught him. She was devastated. She slapped him, walked away, and never saw him again for years. Rachel moved on. She went to UNH, graduated, met you, and got married. Everything seemed perfect. But then, on one of her trips to visit me, during one of her monthly visits, she ran into Adam at the market. She was gone longer than usual, and when she came back, she was glowing, like she was on cloud 9. When I asked, she told me she had bumped into Adam, and they had caught up over coffee. I reminded her of how he had betrayed her, and told her it was inappropriate to reconnect with him now that she was married. She brushed me off, insisting it was innocent. I thought that was the end of it. But later, I found out they had exchanged numbers and stayed in touch. The next time she visited me, she had already made plans to meet him and asked me to cover for her. If you called, I was supposed to say she had stepped out and forgotten her phone. This went on for years. She didn't always wait for her monthly visits. She found ways to sneak away and see him whenever she could. Ava stopped talking, her words hanging in the air like a weight I couldn't escape. When I confronted Ava about what I had learned, she admitted Rachel had told her she wouldn't stop seeing Adam. Rachel claimed she loved both of us, Adam and me, and dismissed her actions as just a fling, promising she would end it. She rationalized that since I didn't know, it wouldn't hurt me. Ava confessed how much it devastated her to hear that. She told Rachel she couldn't continue covering for her, that while Rachel might feel no guilt, she did. Ava described feeling ashamed and embarrassed by her own silence over the years. So Rachel cheated on me for at least the first 3 years of our marriage? I asked, the words cutting through my disbelief. Yes, Ava admitted. After the pregnancy termination, I thought she had stopped seeing him, especially during her visits here. When she was with me, I never saw or heard anything about her meeting Adam again. Thanks for being honest now, Ava. I believe you. But I can't help wondering, was she meeting Adam at the casino? I can't think of any other reason she'd be there instead of at work. Ava's voice broke with regret. Antonio, I'm so sorry. I know you must hate me for keeping this from you. But Rachel is my sister. I understand if you don't want me to stay at your house. I'll get a hotel room instead. I needed answers. One more thing. Why did she have her tubes tied? Ava sounded genuinely puzzled. I told you, I didn't know about that. My best guess is she didn't want to go through another pregnancy termination. That's not an easy decision for anyone. It's something you carry for the rest of your life. Even though Rachel cheated, she was still raised as a devout Catholic and went to church every Sunday. She once told me she couldn't imagine life without either of you. She loved you both. But Adam had some kind of hold on her and she couldn't let him go. I think she tied her tubes to avoid the risk of another pregnancy with him. It's the only explanation I can come up with. I shook my head, struggling to process her words. Why not just use protection? She could have had safe closeness with Adam and still had children with me. I don't know. Maybe she did use protection and still got pregnant, or maybe she couldn't trust herself to be careful every time. Maybe it was a spur-of-the-moment decision. Honestly, I don't have an answer for you, Antonio. I wish I did. Silence hung between us. My thoughts spiraled. I'd never felt so lost, so utterly untethered. The woman I loved, the woman I built my life around, was fighting for her life in a hospital bed. And yet, everything I thought I knew about her and our marriage was unraveling. I felt numb, as if every emotion had been stripped away. No love, no anger, no pain, just emptiness. In the space of a few hours, my entire world had collapsed. I had to leave the waiting area. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't sit there any longer. The only thing I could think to do was go to the hospital cafe for a coffee. Alcohol seemed tempting, but I knew it wasn't the answer. I sat at a table with my coffee when my phone buzzed. It was my dad. I told him where I was, and he arrived a few minutes later. As soon as he saw me, he pulled me into a hug. I filled him in on everything I had learned. My God, son, he said, his face etched with disbelief. Have you seen Rachel yet? No, and I'm not sure I want to. He nodded, understanding my hesitation. Take your time. You've been hit with a lot all at once. I need answers, Dad. I need to know why she did this. Ava gave me a lot of details, almost too many, but they don't feel like explanations. They're more like a timeline of events. I can see what happened, but I still don't understand why. Why reconnect with Adam after all those years? Why wasn't our life together enough for her? How could she justify loving two men at the same time? And why didn't she just tell me the truth? My dad sighed, his voice heavy with wisdom and empathy. Son, I don't think Rachel or anyone else can ever fully explain why she did what she did. Sometimes people convince themselves they can have it all without consequences. It doesn't make sense, and it doesn't make it right. But somehow, in her mind, she rationalized it. She thought she could keep her marriage and Adam without losing either. It's foolish, but that's the reality you're facing. So what now? She's been lying to me for at least 13 years, maybe longer if you count when we were dating and engaged. What do I do? What do you want to do? My dad asked gently. I don't know. Right now I'm not thinking straight. I feel completely numb. In a few days I'll probably be furious, and after that I'll fall into a pit of self-pity. I don't know. You've been through a lot in a very short time. No one would blame you for needing time to figure this out, he said. My phone rang again. It was the ICU nurse. They informed me that Rachel was now in room ICU 223 and that I could see her, though only for a few minutes. I ended the call and turned to my dad. They said I can see her now. I'll go with you, he offered. No, I said, shaking my head. I'm not ready. I understand, he replied softly. I need to go home. Follow me there. Okay, son, he said, his voice filled with quiet support. We left the hospital together, the weight of the day pressing down on me like an anchor. On the drive home, my phone rang 4 times. 3 of the calls were from the hospital and 1 was from Ava. I ignored them all. Pulling into the driveway, I saw my dad's car following close behind. Neither of us said a word as we stepped into the house, and I flipped on the lights. Everything felt surreal. My eyes didn't seek out the familiar, a photo of Rachel and me on the mantel, her favorite throw blanket on the couch, or even the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. Nothing stood out. I wasn't looking for anything, yet I saw everything and nothing at once. The only thing that grabbed my focus was the liquor cabinet. My feet carried me straight to the tequila without hesitation. As I poured 2 glasses, I heard the microwave humming. My dad was rummaging in the fridge. He pulled out a lasagna Rachel had made, heated it up, and joked about her skills as a cook. He wasn't wrong. She was a damn good cook. But I couldn't muster the energy to care. We sat at the table together. He ate heartily, cleaning his plate, while I just moved the food around on mine. My appetite was gone. I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had learned, everything I thought I knew that was now unraveling. I asked him what I should do. He admitted he didn't have an easy answer, which didn't exactly comfort me. Fathers are supposed to have wisdom, right? They're supposed to guide you when you're drowning. But he said this was different. He told me the decision was ultimately mine, but promised to help me figure it out. He pushed me to think about my life before today, how things were before I learned the truth. And honestly, things had been great. Work was going well. I was making good money, managing a solid workload, and building a comfortable life. We had a beautiful home, a reliable car, and strong investments. Our marriage, as far as I knew, was happy. My intimacy life with Rachel had been amazing. I believed I had a wife who loved me deeply. But then my dad said something that struck a nerve. He reminded me that Rachel did love me, even though she also loved someone else. That truth cut deep. Still, he encouraged me to separate what I'd learned today from what my life had been. Until now, the lack of children hadn't been a glaring issue for me. I had assumed we were just facing a struggle with fertility, a challenge we'd eventually overcome. I had no idea Rachel had made the decision for us years ago when she tied her tubes. I thought back to the early years of our marriage. We'd both been tested, and the results showed no issues. A few years later, we were tested again. But this time, we went separately because of scheduling conflicts. Now I realize that wasn't true. Rachel had used that as a way to hide the truth. We never exchanged detailed results, just reassured each other that everything was fine. My dad asked if, without the lies about Adam and the tubal ligation, I would still have considered my life with Rachel great. And the answer was yes. Even if we had discovered that we couldn't conceive, I wouldn't have seen that as a reason to end our marriage. We would have found another way. Adoption, maybe. What mattered was that we were together. But this wasn't that simple. Rachel's lies weren't just about children. They were about Adam, her pregnancy termination, and everything she hid from me. My dad forced me to confront the real questions. Could I knowingly share my wife with another man? Could I forgive her for deceiving me, not just about her affair, but about something as deeply personal as the family we dreamed of building? Could I ever trust her again? The answer came easily. No, I couldn't share her, and I couldn't live with the lies. My dad nodded as if he expected that answer. But then he threw me another curveball. Divorce wasn't an easy option. He laid out the reality. Rachel was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life. If I filed for divorce now, before she even woke up, I'd look heartless. It wouldn't matter what she had done, her affair, her lies, or the secrets she kept. No one would care about my side of the story. To everyone else, I'd just be the husband who abandoned his critically injured wife. He was right, of course, but that didn't make it any easier to swallow. Divorce wasn't off the table, but it couldn't happen yet. Then came the hardest question of all. What were the odds of her surviving? I didn't have an answer. The doctors didn't have an answer, and I was left drowning in uncertainty, unsure of how to move forward. Based on the circumstances, it was clear things were far from good. There was little to do but wait. The accident, not being Rachel's fault, meant the insurance and any eventual settlement would cover the medical expenses. If she survived with significant brain damage, she would likely end up in long-term care. In that scenario, she would effectively be out of my life, and Adam wouldn't be in the picture. It would resemble a divorce, except I'd retain the house and my finances. At that moment, the thought of remarrying was far from my mind, so losing the option wasn't a concern. If she didn't make it, and the thought wasn't entirely unwelcome, I would still keep everything: the house, my assets, the life insurance payout, and any settlement money. In that case, she would be permanently out of my life. But the worst-case scenario was a full recovery, with no brain trauma and only the adjustment of living with a prosthetic leg. If that happened, the situation would be more complicated. Once the immediate crisis faded and emotions cooled, I could pursue a divorce. That would mean splitting everything 50-50. But it was an unavoidable reality. Holding on to a loveless marriage just for financial reasons wasn't something I could live with. Then there was Adam. If Rachel recovered, the question of him lingered. Would he even want her in that condition? It was impossible to know. Maybe Adam had a wife and family, and Rachel was just a hidden chapter in his life. Perhaps a divorce would expose him and unravel his life as well. If he was single, there was always the chance he'd disappear when faced with the reality of Rachel's circumstances. Ava wasn't off the hook either. I needed to talk to her husband, Luke. He deserved to know how Ava had been covering for Rachel all these years. Perhaps I'd plant subtle doubts about Ava's own behavior. Not outright lies, but enough to make Luke reconsider her character. Let him draw his own conclusions. As for Adam, it was time to let go of my anger. He hadn't ruined my marriage, Rachel had. Adam had been in the right place at the right time, seizing the opportunity she gave him. Rachel had been the one to betray me, to break our vows. Dwelling on Adam was pointless, and sharing the details of the affair with anyone outside our small circle would only complicate matters. The hospital knew only what the records stated. Rachel had a pregnancy termination. As far as anyone else was concerned, it was a decision she made in the context of our marriage, and there was no need to involve Adam in that narrative. After my dad finished his drink, he gave me a hug and left. I went upstairs to the bedroom Rachel and I had shared for so many years. Looking at the bed, I couldn't stand the idea of her scent lingering on the sheets. I stripped them off and lay on the bare mattress. My phone buzzed constantly on the nightstand, but I ignored it. Whether it was the ICU or Ava, I wasn't ready to talk to either. Eventually, I turned the phone off and let the silence envelop me. That night, sleep was elusive. I woke around 4 a.m., partly because I'd gone to bed so early and partly because of the nightmares. My mind conjured cruel, vivid images of Rachel with Adam. I imagined her crying out in pleasure, sounds I'd never heard from her before, sounds I believed I could never produce. The thought wasn't based on anything real. I'd never seen them together, but my imagination ran wild, feeding my insecurities. As I lay there, I noticed the room's perfection, a reflection of Rachel's tastes and preferences. Every piece of furniture, every knick-knack, every photo, all of it had been her choice. The realization hit me hard. Nothing in the house felt like it belonged to me. I had let her design everything, and I had simply existed within her vision. It was as if I had no claim to the space we shared. Later that day, I forced myself to go to the hospital. I told myself I needed to appear as the caring husband, even if I didn't feel like one. I brought a book, not because I planned to read it, but because holding it felt like a way to mask my unease. As I walked down the ICU corridor, I imagined the nurses judging me. I could almost feel their icy stares, labeling me as the cold-hearted husband who hadn't answered their calls or stayed to be with his wife. When I entered Rachel's room, I saw Ava sitting by her bedside. Rachel was barely recognizable, hooked up to countless machines emitting a chorus of beeps and buzzes. She looked fragile, her body battered and bruised, her face swollen and obscured by tubes and wires. Looking at her, I felt nothing. The woman lying in that bed was a stranger to me, reduced to a shell of the person I thought I knew. I realized with a jolt that I felt more sorrow for animals I saw lying lifeless on the side of the road than I did for Rachel in that moment. Each day for the next week, I followed the same routine. I'd sit in the hospital room, open a book to a random page, and never read a single word. The chair felt like an extension of me, a fixed point in an otherwise chaotic world. But my thoughts were too loud to focus on anything else. Midweek, Samuel finally arrived. He had been out of the country for work when Ava contacted him, and this was the earliest he could make the trip to Springfield. I updated him on Rachel's condition, explaining the limited progress and the upcoming surgeries she would need. But there was a deeper, more painful truth I hadn't yet shared, one I dreaded revealing. When I told Samuel about Rachel's affair, the pregnancy termination, and her lies about wanting children, his face shifted through a spectrum of emotions: shock, sadness, confusion, and then anger. He struggled to process it, unable to reconcile the sister he knew with the actions I described. At first, he refused to believe it, but I reminded him that Ava had corroborated the story and the hospital's records confirmed it. Reluctantly, he accepted the facts, though his disbelief lingered. Samuel asked what I intended to do, but I had no concrete answers. Rachel was unconscious and in no state to continue lying or sneaking around. Until she woke up, if she woke up, I had no choice but to wait. Samuel offered his support, insisting he would have intervened had he known. He expressed his willingness to help in any way, whether it was taking care of my home or covering for me at work. But there was only one thing I needed from him: to tell Luke. Ava's loyalty to Rachel had been toxic, enabling her lies and deceit. Luke deserved to know what his wife had done. how she had supported Rachel's betrayal and concealed it for years. Samuel hesitated, worried about Luke's temper and the potential consequences. He knew how dangerous Luke could be, especially when alcohol was involved. I left the decision to him, but made it clear that the truth would come out one way or another. If Samuel didn't tell him, I would, though I suggested Ava might be safer if she wasn't home when Luke found out. Samuel seemed to understand, and the conversation ended there. The following week, as I sat in the same chair with the same unread book, Ava entered the room. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen, and she limped as she approached. Without warning, she raised her hand to strike me, screaming insults through her tears. I caught her arm before she could hit me, standing as if to defend myself, but I stopped short. She broke down sobbing, her words tumbling out in anguish. Luke had accused her of being unfaithful. He didn't have proof, but argued that if she could lie so easily for Rachel, she was capable of lying to him too. He called her names, hit her, and threw her out of the house. She demanded to know why I had told him, why I couldn't let it go. I reminded her that the truth had been inevitable. Rachel and Ava had created this mess, and now they had to face the fallout. Ava was horrified that Samuel had been the one to tell Luke. Her panic grew as she realized the full extent of the damage, worried that the entire family would now know. She seemed overwhelmed by the prospect of the truth spreading, but I had no sympathy. If Ava hadn't enabled Rachel's actions, none of us would be in this position. As our confrontation cooled, a nurse informed us there was another visitor. Hospital rules limited the number of people allowed in the room, so Ava stepped out. My brother Mark entered the room. Though not biologically related, he was the son of my father's best friend and had always been like a sibling to me. Mark embraced me, his presence a quiet comfort, and handed me a folded newspaper before leaving without a word. When Ava returned, she looked at me with curiosity. I mentioned Mark's brief visit and his gesture of bringing the newspaper. She seemed puzzled by its significance until I opened it to the page Mark had pointed out. It was the Lowell Sun, a regional paper covering towns in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Ava recognized it immediately, and I prepared to show her something I knew would capture her attention. I slid my chair closer to Rachel's bedside, more for the effect than anything else, and unfolded the newspaper I'd been handed earlier. The article described a gruesome discovery. A mutilated body had been pulled from the Merrimack River the night before. The details were horrifying: severe trauma to the face, limbs removed, and other unmentionable mutilations. Initially, identification had been impossible due to the extent of the damage, but DNA testing later confirmed the victim's identity. The deceased was Adam Sinclair, a 34-year-old father of two from Pelham, New Hampshire, who had been reported missing 3 days earlier. There was no known motive, and the police hadn't provided further information. I couldn't help but wonder why his DNA was already on file. It seemed Adam's clean-cut image might not have been entirely truthful. As I thought about the implications, I mused silently about the coincidence of his name and Rachel's past. Ava's reaction was immediate and visceral. She looked pale, visibly shaken, and accused me outright. Her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and anger as she tried to pin the responsibility for Adam's death on me. I reminded her that I had been at the hospital nearly every day, with witnesses to corroborate my whereabouts. I had no motive to act on anything, and the logistics alone made her accusation absurd. Her frustration boiled over as she tried to make sense of it. She pointed to the affair, claiming jealousy might have driven me, but I countered that the supposed affair wasn't public knowledge, and there was no connection between me and Adam that anyone could trace. I even suggested, with a sharp edge to my tone, that perhaps she or Samuel had acted in a misguided attempt to defend Rachel's honor. Her indignation only deepened. She accused me of being cold and unfeeling. I didn't deny it. The weight of everything I had discovered, the betrayal, the lies, the sham of our marriage, had left me numb. I had loved Rachel deeply, but that love had been replaced with a void, as sudden and complete as the collapse of everything I had believed in. The anger, grief, and disillusionment had hardened into something unrecognizable. Ava stormed out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I opened the book in my lap to a random page, but as always, the words didn't register. The days turned into weeks, marked by a repetitive cycle of surgeries and visits to the hospital. Rachel remained unresponsive, her condition unchanged. Eventually, she was transferred to a rehabilitation center. With my vacation time and family medical leave exhausted, I had no choice but to return to work. Though I managed to keep up appearances, my focus had wavered and my performance had suffered slightly. Meanwhile, the news about Adam Sinclair faded away, leaving no further developments or connections to me. At the rehab center, I was asked to review Rachel's medical records again and to complete additional forms, including a Do Not Resuscitate DNR directive. The forms required me to decide on specific actions, whether to allow CPR, electric shocks, or artificial breathing should her heart stop. Another section asked about feeding tubes, whether to continue providing nutrition if she remained unable to eat independently. The questions overwhelmed me. Rachel was already reliant on a ventilator and feeding tube, and the staff explained that these decisions would determine how long those measures were continued. Her heart was beating on its own, albeit weakly, so immediate intervention wasn't required, but the responsibility weighed heavily. This was the moment my father had alluded to, the point at which I could decide to pull the plug. But despite my anger and the pain Rachel had caused me, I wasn't ready to let go. I needed to hear from her. She hadn't denied or admitted anything. I craved the confrontation, the chance to hear her explanations and justifications. I wanted closure, answers to the questions that haunted me. Unable to make a decision, I folded the forms and tucked them into my book, leaving the choice unresolved. 2 weeks later, during a routine visit to the rehab center, I was surprised to find Dr. Patel by Rachel's bedside. He explained that while Rachel was now under the care of the center's medical staff, he felt compelled to check in. Unfortunately, there was no improvement in her condition. The damage to her brainstem remained severe, affecting her ability to breathe and regulate her heart rate. Her prognosis was grim. The likelihood of her regaining independence, let alone consciousness, was almost non-existent. I asked if there was any possibility she might wake up, even if just to talk. Dr. Patel was doubtful, reiterating the severity of her injuries. Then, seemingly unprompted, he brought up the conversation we'd had weeks earlier about her tubal ligation. He confessed that my words had stayed with him, especially as a father of 5. The thought of losing the chance to have children, the way that choice had been taken from me, was something he admitted would devastate him as well. As he left, his words lingered. Rachel's silence, her absence despite her physical presence, felt more suffocating than ever. The doctor surveyed the room with a subtle, almost calculated expression before explaining the additional tests he had performed. He stated that in order to thoroughly evaluate Rachel's condition, he had conducted exploratory procedures to rule out any overlooked internal injuries. Among these was a hysterosalpingogram, a test involving the injection of dye into the uterus to observe whether it flows through the fallopian tubes, if they are intact. The results confirmed what the medical records indicated. Rachel had indeed undergone a tubal ligation. His words carried an air of regret as he apologized, offering a sympathetic nod before leaving. Left alone, I sat in silence, unable to track the passage of time. Minutes, maybe hours, slipped by as I processed this final confirmation. Eventually, I knew what I had to do. I reached into the bedside drawer, retrieved the pen left by the admissions clerk, and unfolded the DNR forms from my book. Slowly, I checked the boxes, deciding to let nature run its course. But I wasn't ready to stop there. Closure demanded more than a signature. It demanded answers. For years, I had trusted Rachel implicitly, never questioning her or invading what I considered her personal space. But now, trust seemed laughable. I resolved to search for the truth she had hidden from me. When I returned home, I went directly to the office and took her laptop. It wasn't password protected, though her accounts, Facebook, email, and Twitter, were. Rachel had never been tech-savvy and always struggled with passwords, often resorting to writing them down. I searched the desk drawers but found nothing. Moving to her purses, bags, and nightstand, I came up empty-handed again. Finally, back at the computer, I noticed the Notes app on her Mac's dock. Clicking it, I found a list of accounts and passwords. Using the information, I logged into her Facebook account on the first try. Among hundreds of contacts was Adam Sinclair. Their interactions, however, seemed innocuous. Messages exchanged over the past few months contained nothing but mundane chatter. Adam mentioned his wife Sheila and their 2 children, John and Kayla. There were no red flags, no trace of an affair in these messages. Next, I accessed her primary email account. Once again, there was nothing incriminating. Just spam, work emails, exchanges with friends, and my own messages to her. Frustrated but persistent, I returned to the Notes app and found a combination of her name and numbers. It looked like another email login. Knowing Rachel's tendency to use anniversaries or birthdays for passwords, I guessed her typical combination and opened Gmail. This time I hit the jackpot. The inbox revealed years of correspondence with Adam. Their emails chronicled the affair from its beginning to its recent state. Their messages described where and when they met, their excitement over stolen moments, and graphic details of their physical encounters. Adam often compared Rachel to his wife, complaining about Sheila's lack of enthusiasm in bed and praising Rachel for fulfilling him in ways his wife never could. The messages detailed the affair's origin, an accidental meeting that rekindled their connection. While their first weekend together didn't involve love, Rachel described a passionate makeout session and a promise to see each other again. Over time, Rachel became deeply emotionally invested, repeatedly urging Adam to leave Sheila and marry her. She even expressed willingness to raise his children, claiming they would be enough to complete her life. Adam, however, refused to leave Sheila. He didn't want to risk losing access to his children. Instead, he convinced Rachel to settle for their monthly trysts. Despite his refusal to commit fully, Rachel's love for Adam clearly outweighed her loyalty to me. Reading the emails, I also discovered Adam's insistence on unprotected closeness, claiming protection caused him discomfort. Rachel, foolishly compliant, agreed. It was evident that her pregnancy had been a result of this recklessness, and the tubal ligation was her solution to prevent future complications while continuing the affair. The final blow came with Rachel's repeated attempts to convince Adam to divorce Sheila. Her declarations of love for him, coupled with her promises to be a better wife and mother, shattered whatever remnants of affection I still held for her. I now had no reservations about signing the DNR forms. 6 months after the accident, Rachel's heart gave out. At her funeral, I played the role of a grieving husband, accepting condolences with a solemn face. She was cremated and buried beside her father in a modest cemetery near the church her parents had attended. Family and friends praised the gesture, noting how much she had adored her father and how he had always called her his favorite. What no one knew was that Rachel's burial was far from what she had wanted. She had made her wishes clear years ago, asking for a bronze casket with engraved flowers, her favorite items placed inside, and a burial at a hilltop cemetery near the New Hampshire seacoast, a place we both loved, where we had met and where I had proposed. We had even purchased a family plot there, but I refused to honor her wishes. There was no way I would be buried next to her, not after what she had done. Rachel had written her own ending, and I made sure it was on my terms. The life insurance policy was going to come in handy, especially since I was planning to move to New Hampshire myself. Samuel and I still got along great, and the idea of buying a house there, with room for a boat, felt like a promise of good times ahead. Fishing, relaxing, enjoying the water, it all sounded perfect. Meanwhile, the settlement from Rachel's accident was still under review, but it looked like it could turn into a windfall. The guy who hit her had been drunk, way over the legal limit, at a company event, driving a company car with a suspended license. It was a mess, and my lawyers were going to have a field day with it. Ava and Luke's divorce wasn't a shock. Him hitting her was the breaking point, but it wasn't the only reason. He refused to admit he had a drinking problem or deal with his anger issues. Ava was furious at Samuel and me for telling Luke what we knew, but I don't regret it. We did the right thing. It freed her from someone who didn't deserve her, and if that wasn't worth the fallout, I don't know what was. When I shared my findings about Rachel with Samuel and Ava, I knew it would hurt them, but I needed to get it off my chest. Rachel had been a victim, yes, but so was I. I wanted vindication, something to set the record straight. Samuel was devastated, disgusted by what I told him. Ava, though, was different. She was angry and upset, but she hugged me through her tears, apologizing for everything. I could see how deeply she felt it. As for me, I've always wanted children, but I'm not in a rush to remarry. I figure it'll happen when it's supposed to. Or maybe I'll end up with someone who already has kids. There are a lot of single moms out there, after all. One thing I do know, it won't be the widow Sinclair. That thought drifted away as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, staring at my phone. The world outside felt oddly frozen, like everything had stopped just long enough for me to breathe. The chaos of the last few months had finally settled, leaving me in this strange, still moment. I thought back to the call that had come out of nowhere. The question I'd been asked still felt surreal in its simplicity. "Do you like soup?" At the time, it had caught me off guard. Without thinking, I'd answered, surprising myself. I hated it earlier, but now I do. Even now, sitting here alone, I found myself chuckling at the absurdity of it. Soup. What a ridiculous code, but somehow it worked. It was so simple, so unassuming, yet it felt like it meant something deeper. Comfort, maybe, or clarity in the middle of chaos. It was a strange kind of poetry. I thought about everything that had happened. The anger, the heartbreak, the betrayals, For so long, those feelings had weighed me down, but now something else was starting to emerge. Satisfaction. Not joy or triumph, but a quiet sense of peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. The buzz of my phone pulled me back to the moment. Another unknown number flashed on the screen, but this time, I didn't answer. I placed the phone on the table, leaned back in my chair, and let myself linger in the silence. The question still echoed in my head, along with my answer. I like soup now. And maybe, just maybe, I'll like whatever comes next. Thomas Reeves's journey into law enforcement wasn't born out of ambition, but from tragedy. As a young boy in rural Massachusetts, he witnessed a violent robbery that claimed the life of his father, a local shopkeeper. That moment seared an unshakable resolve into him, to ensure no family endured such loss without justice. During his college years, Thomas's knack for piecing together intricate puzzles led him to criminology. At the time, the notion of joining the police force seemed distant. He had initially planned a career in academia. However, an internship with the Boston Police Department exposed him to the grim realities of crime and the profound satisfaction of solving cases. In his rookie years, Thomas was quickly recognized for his ability to detect patterns others missed. An uncanny intuition paired with methodical investigation brought him his first major case, a serial burglar who had eluded capture for months. The success established his reputation, but it also painted a target on his back. Before marrying Victoria, Thomas had weathered the complexities of human nature, seeing both the worst and the best in people. Yet, he had never felt more vulnerable than when he first proposed to her. Victoria, then a rising star in Boston's cutthroat real estate market, represented the kind of success and determination Thomas admired. Their partnership seemed unshakable at the time. The couple's Beacon Hill home was a testament to their shared achievements. It was both a sanctuary and a symbol, reflecting Victoria's refined taste and Thomas's relentless dedication to creating a secure space for their future. Life seemed idyllic, though cracks began to form as their careers demanded more time and energy. As Victoria's real estate empire expanded, so too did the distance between them. What began as subtle changes, a new perfume, unexplained absences, grew into glaring signs of secrecy. For Thomas, whose instincts rarely betrayed him, it felt like the beginning of a case too close to home. The persistent drumming of autumn rain against the bedroom window mirrored the tension brewing inside Detective Thomas Reeves. Standing motionless near the entrance of their spacious closet, his hands buried deep in his pockets, he observed his wife preparing for yet another evening away. Victoria Torrey Reeves, exuding her usual composed charm, applied a vivid layer of crimson lipstick with practiced precision. Her calm exterior did little to ease Thomas's concerns. Years of policing had honed his ability to read people, and something about Torrey's recent behavior sent a chill down his spine. Subtle shifts in her demeanor hinted at secrets she wasn't sharing, and the mounting evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Ambition had always been one of Torrey's defining traits, the very quality that had drawn Thomas to her in the first place. But now, it felt as though that drive had taken a darker turn, and Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that her priorities had shifted in ways she wasn't willing to share. "Another late-night meeting?" he asked, keeping his tone light, though his eyes stayed fixed on her. From the mirror, he saw the way she avoided his gaze, adjusting the pearl earrings he'd given her for their anniversary. "The Morrison deal won't wait," she replied with practiced nonchalance, reaching for her Chanel No. 5. "Don't wait up." Thomas watched as she smoothed the unfamiliar black Valentino dress over her hips. Her wardrobe had become noticeably more extravagant in recent months, her once elegant but understated style now replaced by high-end designer pieces. "Those meetings seemed to stretch later and later," he observed casually, leaning against the doorway as she gathered her things. "That's what happens when you're managing a $50 million project," Torrey said, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor of their meticulously renovated Victorian home in Beacon Hill. The house, much like her, was a symbol of her skyrocketing success in Boston's competitive real estate world. Trailing her downstairs, Thomas couldn't help but notice how often she glanced at her phone, her fingers moving across the screen with what seemed like nervous urgency. Her makeup was heavier than usual, and the entire picture, her polished appearance, the vague explanations, the nervous energy, didn't add up. "Is Jack Morrison joining tonight?" he asked, referring to the lead investor in her project. She paused, but only for a fraction of a second. No, he's overseas. Just some board members and the technical team. Sliding her phone into her Hermes Birkin bag, she avoided his eyes again. Sounds like a packed agenda, Thomas remarked, opening the door for her. The rain outside had intensified, battering the cobblestone streets. Drive carefully. It's nasty out there. Stay out. For a brief moment, something flickered in her expression, something like guilt. She stepped closer, straightening his tie in a gesture that felt almost nostalgic. Don't stay up too late working on that cold case, she said softly, before walking out into the storm. From the doorway, Thomas watched as her Mercedes pulled away, disappearing into the rainy night. Her perfume lingered, but so did another scent, something woodsy and expensive, distinctly masculine. In his office, Thomas opened his laptop and activated the GPS tracker he'd placed on her car weeks earlier. The red dot moved across the map, heading not for the financial district but toward Back Bay. Picking up his phone, he dialed a familiar number. After a few rings, Detective Grace Rodriguez answered. Grace, it's Tom. Can we meet tomorrow? Usual place? She paused, but only briefly. Everything okay? Just need a second opinion, Thomas said, his eyes glued to the screen. Dorchester Diner, 7 sharp, Grace replied. I'll grab our booth. Appreciate it, he said. I'll bring what I've got. After hanging up, Thomas leaned back in his chair, replaying the evening in his mind. He grabbed his notebook and began jotting down observations. The expensive wardrobe upgrades, the vague answers, the inconsistencies. Rain continued to pound against the window, and the clock in the hallway chimed 9, breaking the silence. Thomas closed the notebook and moved to the window, staring out at the rain-slick streets below. His gut told him that this wasn't just about an affair. It felt bigger, more calculated. He scrolled through his contacts, pausing at Grace's name. After years on the force, he knew the most dangerous cracks often formed closest to home. Tomorrow's coffee would be the start of something deeper. The Dorchester Diner hadn't changed in over a decade. Its cracked vinyl booths and faded menus had seen countless cops and detectives through tough mornings. And today was no different. Thomas slid into his usual seat across from Grace, the air thick with the comforting smell of coffee and bacon. Grace hadn't changed much either. Her sharp eyes scanned his face as she handed him a cup of black coffee. You look terrible, she said bluntly, pushing a plate of hash browns toward him. Nice to see you too, Thomas replied, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. Thanks for meeting me. This isn't official. I figured, Grace said, leaning back in the booth. You've got that look, like there's something you're not ready to say out loud. Thomas pulled a manila folder from his bag, setting it between them on the table. It's personal, he admitted. But it feels bigger than that. Grace studied him for a long moment before speaking. You sure you want to dig into this? Sometimes it's better not to know. Before he could answer, their waitress Betty arrived with their order. Denver omelets, extra cheese and peppers, she said with a smile. Coffee's on the way. Thomas nodded his thanks, but didn't touch the food. Instead, he opened the folder and pushed it toward Grace. I need your perspective, he said quietly. I think this is just the tip of something much larger. Grace scanned the contents, her expression hardening as she flipped through the pages. You're right, she said finally. This isn't just personal, it's a web, and I think it's time we start untangling it. Thomas nodded, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was something far more dangerous. And now it was time to uncover the truth. After Betty left, Thomas opened the folder, revealing bank statements, property records, and surveillance photos. Grace's eyebrows rose as she scanned the documents. These transactions are deliberate, she said, pointing to a statement. Just under reporting limits, spaced out to look random. That's textbook money laundering. Thomas pushed another paper forward. Look who joined her charity board 3 months ago. Grace's eyes narrowed. Alexander Wade? The hedge fund guy? She quickly typed something into her phone. We've heard whispers about him. Nothing solid, but enough to keep tabs. Thomas slid over a series of photos showing Tori and Wade meeting at upscale spots around the city. It's not just money, he said. Their body language looks staged, like they're performing. Grace nodded, her fork poised over her hash browns. That's not an affair, it's tradecraft. If she's involved with Wade, this is serious. Thomas showed her video footage of Tori and Wade entering a hotel. Watch how they scan their surroundings. It's deliberate. Grace exhaled sharply. Tom, your wife might be in over her head. Coercion's a real possibility. I've considered that, he said grimly, but I need proof. That's why I called you. Grace tapped her notebook thoughtfully. Wade's financials will be our starting point, My team's flagged suspicious real estate deals. We'll cross-reference with Tori's projects, but you have to keep this under the radar. I know how to play it, Thomas said, his resolve hardening. I just need the truth. Grace gave a small nod. We'll get it, but be careful. This is professional-level danger. One misstep, and they'll know we're onto them. Thomas's expression was steely as he stared at the folder. I've spent 2 decades keeping up appearances. I'll do whatever it takes. They spent an hour reviewing documents, Grace jotting notes and texting her team. As the diner emptied, their coffee cooled, and their unease grew. Here's one more, Thomas said, sliding over a photograph. Taken yesterday at the St. Regis. Recognize him? Grace's face darkened as she studied the image. I do. He's tied to major players in international finance. If these people are involved, she didn't need to finish. They both knew the implications. Keep digging, Thomas said, gathering the files. But stay careful, secure channels only, and watch your back. As they left, Grace caught his arm. We'll figure this out, Tom. Just don't do anything reckless. Thomas managed a wry smile. Slow and steady, Grace. That's what worries me, she muttered, squeezing his arm before stepping into the rain. Thomas paid the bill, leaving a generous tip, and walked out into the dreary weather. His phone buzzed. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Tucking it away, his jaw tightened. The investigation was officially underway. Later that night, Thomas parked in the precinct garage. The rain had stopped, leaving the slick concrete reflecting harsh fluorescent light. Nearly midnight, the garage was almost deserted. His footsteps echoed as he approached his SUV, the weight of the day's findings heavy in his briefcase. Another set of footsteps made him pause, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. Detective Reeves? A young woman stepped into the light. Mid-20s, professionally dressed, but disheveled, she looked terrified. I'm Bethany Porter, she said, voice trembling. Wade's assistant, I need to talk. Thomas studied her. Late for a social call, Miss Porter. This isn't social. She pulled a USB drive from her bag, causing him to tense. Wade isn't who he claims to be. Neither is your wife. They're planning something terrible. I couldn't stay silent. Thomas didn't take the drive immediately. Why me? Why not the FBI? Her laugh was bitter. I tried. Wade has connections everywhere. Files vanish, complaints are buried, witnesses. She trailed off, glancing nervously around. Please, take it. Everything's on here. But be careful. They monitor everything. Thomas accepted the drive, watching her withdraw quickly. How did you get this? I'm his assistant. I handle his schedule, correspondence. He underestimates me, but I've been documenting everything. Her hands shook as she spoke. The charity board, the Morrison Project, it's not what you think. Offshore accounts, shell companies, people who vanish after one meeting. A car engine echoed, and Bethany flinched. No police reports, she whispered. No official channels. Just look at the drive, but not at home or the station. Thomas pocketed the drive. How can I reach you? You can't, she said, backing into the shadows. Be careful, detective, especially with those closest to you. Before he could respond, she vanished into the garage. The USB felt like a lead weight in his pocket as he scanned the now silent space. Reaching his car, Thomas texted Grace. Need secure location, off the books tech support. Her reply came swiftly. My place, 1 hour, bring coffee. Thomas took a long, indirect route home, maintaining a facade of routine in case anyone was watching. The USB drive in his pocket felt heavy, its implications replaying in his mind alongside Bethany's warning about trust. At home, he found Tori's note on the counter. Gone to bed early. Big presentation tomorrow. The house was quiet as he moved through it, instincts from years of training keeping his steps silent. After changing and grabbing his laptop bag, he left a note about following up on a case lead. In their bedroom, Tori appeared to be asleep, though the faint trace of that unfamiliar cologne lingered. Pausing at the doorway, Thomas replayed Bethany's words about betrayal. Back in his car, he used an old burner phone from his undercover days and took a cautious hour-long drive to Grace's house, ensuring he wasn't followed. The USB in his pocket felt like a live grenade ready to detonate. Grace was waiting in her office, her encrypted laptop ready. She took the drive, her expression serious. Are you sure about this? Once we know, there's no turning back. Thomas thought of Tori, Bethany, and the growing suspicions. Do it, he said. Grace inserted the drive, and files began to decrypt. Thomas sat silently, bracing himself. When the first file opened, the plans laid out were worse than anything he'd imagined. The next morning, Thomas sat in his car across from McKenna Security Solutions, a sleek downtown office building. The USB's contents were still weighing on him. Colonel James Iron Jim McKenna, his former Special Forces commander, was his next stop. McKenna's office reflected his disciplined nature, meticulously arranged awards, strategic furniture placement, and nothing out of place. "You look like hell," McKenna said as Thomas entered, shaking his hand and motioning him to sit. "When's the last time you slept?" "Not important." Thomas placed the USB on McKenna's desk. "I need your expertise and your discretion." McKenna plugged the drive into a secure laptop, his expression darkening as he scanned the files. "Your wife's caught up with dangerous people," he said, turning the screen to show a dossier. "Wade's real name is Anton Petrov, ex-FSB, running a massive money laundering operation." Thomas felt a chill. "Russian intelligence?" "Former FSB," McKenna clarified. "He built his empire after the Soviet collapse. He displayed a web of financial transactions. The Morrison development isn't real estate, it's a front for laundering money." "Why involve me?" Thomas asked, leaning forward. McKenna pointed to a timeline. "You started digging into property transfers tied to the development. Petrov saw you as a threat and decided to eliminate you." Thomas's stomach twisted. "And Tori?" McKenna pulled up more files. "Her real estate success is built on dirty money. Petrov started with legitimate-looking investments and slowly pulled her into his operation. Now he has enough to implicate her in felonies, ensuring her cooperation." Thomas's thoughts raced. "The homicide plot ties up loose ends." "Exactly. Classic FSB tactics. Control, compromise, eliminate." Thomas stood and looked out the window at Boston Harbor. "I need to get Tori out. Whatever she's done, she's still my wife." McKenna joined him. "It's not that simple. Petrov's operation is entrenched. Walking away won't stop them." Thomas turned. "Then we bring them down." McKenna grinned, a glint of their shared combat days in his eyes. "That's the Tom Reeves I know." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Cancel my meetings. I need everything we have on the Morrison Development's security protocols." For hours, Thomas and McKenna combed through blueprints, security schedules, and financial records. McKenna's resources were staggering. Satellite images, building schematics, and personnel files for everyone tied to Petrov's operation. "He's paranoid, but arrogant," McKenna said, spreading a map of Boston's financial district. "He hides behind his Wade persona, thinking his FSB training makes him untouchable." Thomas nodded. "We let him think his plan is working, keep him comfortable while we build our case." "Classic counterintelligence," McKenna agreed. "I've got federal contacts who've been after Petrov for years but lacked the evidence, until now." Thomas glanced at his phone. Another text from Tori. "Working late again." The pieces clicked. This wasn't an affair. She was being manipulated by an exploiter. "What's our first move?" Thomas asked. "We make him think he's winning," McKenna said, showing an organizational chart of Petrov's network. "Feed him what he expects, gather evidence, and prepare to bring it all down." As they planned, Thomas thought of Tori, likely in a luxury hotel, unaware she was being played. McKenna's voice broke his thoughts. "From now on, trust no one. Petrov has people everywhere." Thomas remembered Bethany's warning. "Understood." McKenna retrieved burner phones and encrypted drives from a safe. "Welcome to the Shadow War. Let's hunt." The next 2 weeks were a carefully orchestrated operation. With McKenna and Grace, Thomas planted disinformation while collecting evidence. Using Bethany's access to Wade's office, they fed subtle hints that the homicide plot was on track. Grace set up a secure operations center in an abandoned warehouse, its monitors tracking Petrov's network. $5 million just moved through the Caymans, she reported. "He's consolidating assets." Thomas studied the data. He's preparing to act. The door opened and Madeline Walsh entered. A seasoned CIA operative, she exuded authority. Dropping a thick file on the table, she said, "You were right. Petrov's network spans 12 cities." Thomas scanned the file. "How does he operate?" Madeline brought up a map dotted with compromised developers. "He targets ambitious people, manipulates them with blackmail, seduction, or financial schemes, and turns them into pawns." Thomas's chest tightened. "Tori's just another sufferer?" Madeline's tone softened. "She's vulnerable, but not innocent. She made choices, some unethical." Before Thomas could respond, a tech analyst interrupted. "Wade just called an emergency board meeting for the Morrison development." They watched surveillance footage as attendees arrived. Tori appeared in a Chanel suit, her Hermes bag in hand. "She's nervous," Madeline observed. "See how she keeps adjusting her collar? Classic stress sign." Thomas stared at the screen, remembering how Tori fidgeted with jewelry when anxious. "We've got audio," Grace said, filling the room with the board meeting's feed. Wade's smooth voice came through. All obstacles have been addressed. The final phase begins. Thomas's skin crawled. They were treating his planned homicide like a business deal. Your wife's unusually quiet, Madeline noted. She knows what's coming, Thomas said, his voice heavy. She's already made her choice. The board meeting lasted another hour, full of coded conversations and hidden agendas. Afterward, Tori and Wade left together, heading to their usual hotel. But something was different this time. Look at Wade's new security detail, McKenna noted, pointing to the screen. Ex-Spetsnaz, he's bringing in heavy hitters. They're preparing for action, Madeline said. The question is, what's our move? Thomas didn't hesitate. We keep up the ruse, make them believe their plan is on track, and gather all the evidence we need. Grace pulled up financial records. I'm building a RICO case. If we prove the pattern across all 12 cities, we can dismantle the entire network. We need solid proof, Madeline added. Something that ties Wade to Petrov and exposes the operation's full scale. Thomas turned to McKenna. Can we leverage the new security guys? One of them has a gambling issue, the other has family debts, McKenna replied with a grin. We're on it. Careful, Madeline warned. Push too hard and Petrov will sense a trap. Thomas shook his head. We don't push. We let them come to us. Madeline's tone turned somber. There's something else. Tori's involvement goes deeper than we thought. She's been actively participating for years. Thomas took a deep breath. Show me. Madeline displayed the evidence, and the truth hit Thomas like a gut punch. Tori hadn't been just a pawn. She'd knowingly made decisions that placed her firmly in Petrov's web. The woman he'd loved for 15 years was not who he thought she was. Later, in a dimly lit parking garage, Thomas waited in the shadows. McKenna's intel was clear. This was where Petrov's men would strike. A black SUV arrived, and 3 men stepped out, their movements revealing military training. Thomas recognized them as ex-Spetsnaz operatives from the surveillance photos. They swept the area, moving with precision, but they underestimated their target. Thomas had prepared meticulously, knowing every blind spot and acoustic trick in the garage. When the lights flickered, the men tensed, splitting up to search. The first went down silently, subdued with a chokehold. The second was more cautious, but fell to Thomas's experience and strategy. The third was the toughest, weapon drawn and scanning the shadows. Their brief fight left Thomas with a bruised rib, but his counterattack was swift and decisive. Securing the unconscious men, Thomas searched their phones. The communications he found revealed the extent of Petrov's operation, and something far worse, Tori's active involvement. One chilling message stood out. Target's routine confirmed. Wife says pension and insurance updated. She's ready to play grieving widow. Thomas leaned against a pillar, staring at the screen in disbelief. The designer clothes, late nights, and distant behavior weren't just about money laundering. They were part of a plan to have him liquidated and collect his benefits. Sirens in the distance snapped him back. He photographed the evidence and anonymously reported the scene before disappearing. By the time police arrived, Petrov's men would be unable to explain their presence without exposing the operation. As Thomas drove toward the safe house, his thoughts raced. The confrontation in the garage had provided vital evidence linking Petrov's network to organized crime, but it also exposed a painful truth about his wife. His phone buzzed with a message from Grace. Evidence secured, meeting at safe house in 30. He turned his car, his resolve hardening. The clock was ticking. Petrov's network would soon realize something had gone wrong. The safe house, a nondescript walk-up in Somerville, was perfect for avoiding detection. Parking several blocks away, Thomas approached on foot, carefully checking for any signs of a tail. Inside, Grace, McKenna, and Madeline were already working, their faces lit by glowing monitors. The phones? Grace asked. Thomas handed them over along with his own phone, loaded with photos of key messages. It's bad. Tori isn't just laundering money, she's been planning something far worse. Grace plugged in the phones, her face tightening as the messages appeared. This is methodical, she said. She's been setting this up for months, maybe years. Classic sociopath, McKenna muttered, reading over her shoulder. Playing a role to perfection. Madeline cross-referenced financial records. These life insurance adjustments fit the timeline. She's been methodically paving the way for your homicide. Thomas paced the room, his ribs aching. I thought she was a sufferer being manipulated, but she's been complicit all along. Madeline spoke softly. Sometimes those closest to us are the hardest to truly know. The room was silent until Grace announced, We've got everything to dismantle the operation. Financial records, contact lists, operational details. But if we act too soon, they'll scatter, McKenna warned. We need them to think their plan is on track. Thomas stopped pacing. They'll expect those men to check in soon. We've got 12 hours at most. A phone buzzed, freezing everyone. Grace read the message aloud. Is it done? Need confirmation for next phase. It was from Tori. Thomas felt like he'd been punched. His wife's detached words, treating his homicide as a task, shattered any lingering hope. We use this, Madeline said, her tone sharp. Keep them thinking everything's on schedule. McKenna nodded. We hit them fast while they still believe their plan is intact. Thomas stared at the message, memories of his marriage clashing with the cold reality. How long has she been planning this? How much of our life was real? Grace's voice was soft but steady. What's our move, Tom? Thomas straightened. We turn their plan against them, keep control of the narrative, and make them believe they're still winning. McKenna pulled up schematics of Petrov's operation. We know their personnel, protocols, and next moves. The advantage is ours. And they still think they're dealing with a cop, Madeline added. Not a special forces veteran with a team of intelligence operatives. Thomas looked at the message one last time. Send the reply. Let's set the trap. Grace crafted the response, and as she hit send, Thomas moved to the window, staring at the city lights. Somewhere, his wife awaited news of his end of life. Soon, she'd learn just how wrong she'd been. The surveillance room was alive with activity, its monitors glowing faintly as Grace adjusted the audio feeds. McKenna's voice came through their earpieces. Camera 3 is live. His team had worked all night planting surveillance equipment in Tori and Petrov's penthouse. Thomas watched the screens intently, every muscle tensed. The game had shifted. Now, it was their turn to strike. Thomas tensed as the elevator doors opened on the surveillance feed. Tori stepped out, followed by Petrov, now shedding his Wade persona. His transformation was striking. Gone was the polished hedge fund manager, replaced by the cold precision of a trained operative. Everything's proceeding as planned, Petrov said, his Russian accent now clear. Shrugging off his tailored jacket, he let it fall onto a leather chair. The police found exactly what we wanted them to. Grace's team had carefully staged the garage scene, planting selective evidence to support the narrative of Thomas's end of life, a cop caught in a botched robbery. Tori moved to the bar, pouring champagne with steady hands. The diamonds at her throat sparkled. Last year's anniversary gift. The detective on scene didn't question a thing, she said with satisfaction. Just another routine robbery gone wrong. Petrov raised his glass in mock celebration. The great Detective Reeves, brought down by common thugs. The irony is delicious. Thomas's eyes stayed on his wife, searching for any sign of regret. Instead, she smiled coldly. He never saw my potential. Treated me like a trophy wife. Now, everything he built is mine. She gazed out at the Boston skyline. The pension, the insurance, the house, it all transfers automatically. No divorce, no legal battles. Clean. Grace's hand squeezed Thomas's arm in silent support as McKenna's team moved into position around the building, waiting for the signal. You've exceeded my expectations, Victoria, Petrov said, joining her at the window. When I brought you into the Morrison deal, I wasn't sure you had the stomach for this, but you're a natural. Tori's brittle laugh filled the room. Real estate is a shark tank, Anton. You swim with exploiters or you get eaten. She set down her glass. Should we rehearse for tomorrow? The grieving widow must be flawless. Thomas's jaw clenched as he watched her rehearse her devastated spouse act under Petrov's coaching. Every detail was practiced. The trembling voice, the tearful gestures, the photo clutched at the funeral. Remember, Petrov instructed, this isn't just for the police. The whole city will be watching. The grieving widow of Boston's most decorated cop. Perfect for the headlines. I've been playing this role for 15 years, Tori replied, dabbing dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Each word was a blow to Thomas. The life he'd shared with her was nothing but a carefully crafted lie. Movement outside, Grace said, switching cameras. Petrov's security detail was arriving, SUVs pulling up to the building. They're rotating shifts. Thomas glanced at his watch. In 6 hours, news of his end of life would break. Petrov and Tori still believed their plan was flawless. Send the confirmation, he said. Grace sent the staged message from Petrov's men, reporting Thomas's elimination. Minutes later, they saw Petrov check his phone and smile. It's done, Petrov announced. By tomorrow, your story will dominate the news. Tori raised her glass. To new beginnings, she said with a smirk. And to my dear husband. He should have kept his nose out of the Morrison deal. Petrov nodded approvingly. Your delivery is better, but add a touch of grief when mentioning him. It will sell the story. For hours, they watched as Petrov and Tori discussed their plans, from press statements to financial moves. Each casual mention of Thomas's homicide revealed their ruthless intentions. Around midnight, Petrov left for his penthouse, leaving Tori alone. Thomas watched her reflection in the window as she practiced her widow's smile. The ambition on her face was chilling, no remorse, only satisfaction. All units ready, McKenna's voice came through. Waiting for the command. Thomas's gaze stayed on Tori. Let them enjoy their celebration, he said. Tomorrow we show them a performance they'll never forget. Grace gave a curt nod, already in sync with federal agencies preparing for the morning's critical operation. On a nearby monitor, Tori lifted her glass in a self-congratulatory toast to her reflection, unaware that surveillance cameras captured her every move. The scene was set for the grand finale, though only Thomas and his team knew how this story would truly end. The first rays of dawn bathed Boston's skyline in golden hues as Grace orchestrated tactical teams stationed across the city. Months of painstaking preparation had culminated in this moment, with simultaneous raids planned in a dozen cities to dismantle Petrov's entire operation. Status update, Grace commanded, her voice steady over the comms as she tracked multiple feeds. Reports poured in with precision. Team Alpha in position at the penthouse. Team Bravo covering the skybridge. Team Charlie securing the garage exits. Financial units ready to freeze accounts. McKenna's voice broke through the controlled chatter. Primary target on the move. Petrov just left his suite, heading toward the skybridge. Through surveillance feeds, Thomas tracked Petrov's movements. The man's security details scanned for threats. Unaware they were already surrounded. Evidence from the confiscated hitmen's phones had given Thomas's team everything they needed. Security plans, guard schedules, even the codes to Petrov's private elevator. Target has entered the primary location, McKenna reported, proceeding to Phase 2. On the screens, Petrov strode into Tori's penthouse. She was dressed impeccably for her role. A sleek black designer suit, makeup flawless and red-rimmed eyes, painstakingly created with irritants rather than genuine tears. Standing before a mirror, she rehearsed her eulogy, her voice cracking at carefully calculated moments. He was my everything, she recited, her hand over her heart. A brave officer, a devoted husband. I still can't believe he's gone. Impressive delivery, Petrov remarked, pouring himself coffee. The press will eat it up. Do you have the charity statement ready? His memory deserves it, of course. Tori's smile was cold and exploitory. Nothing opens wallets faster than a grieving widow starting a foundation for her late husband. We'll have millions moving through it in no time. Their casual plotting to profit from Thomas's supposed end of life sealed his resolve. He keyed his radio. All teams, execute. The operation unfolded with clockwork precision. Across the country, federal agents swarmed offices, seized assets, and arrested key figures in Petrov's empire. Bank accounts were frozen, shell companies dismantled, and safe houses raided. Back in the penthouse, Tori adjusted her costume jewelry, chosen to project the perfect image of mourning, when the sharp crack of breaching charges shattered the quiet. McKenna's team surged through multiple entry points with flawless coordination. Federal agents, down on the ground! Petrov moved instinctively, his FSB training kicking in as he reached for a concealed weapon. But McKenna's operatives, former special forces, were ready. I wouldn't, McKenna said coolly. Your entire operation is collapsing as we speak. It's over. Tori's mask slipped, her meticulously composed facade giving way to raw fury as she recognized McKenna. This means... Yes, Mrs. Reeves, Grace said, stepping in with her federal badge displayed. Your husband sends his regards. Tori's stunned expression mirrored Petrov's as realization dawned. Her intricate web of deceit had been part of Thomas's larger plan all along. Practicing your lines, Thomas' voice crackled through the team's comms. Save them for your prison audience. Desperation seized Petrov. He hurled his coffee mug at an agent and lunged toward what he thought was a panic room. But McKenna's team had already neutralized its security features. Clear. Target secured, came the final report. As Petrov and Tori were restrained, Grace recited their rights. Agents documented every piece of evidence meticulously. The phones from Petrov's hitmen had given them the leverage for RICO charges, ensuring no loose ends. The Morrison project? Tori muttered bitterly as she passed Grace in handcuffs. Seized like everything else, Grace replied. Your elaborate scheme to stage a homicide gave us the predicate crimes we needed. Turns out plotting to eliminate a cop isn't the best cover. Similar scenes played out nationwide. Grace's phone buzzed with confirmations. Chicago, secured. Miami, documents in custody. Seattle, operation complete. Dallas, no casualties. McKenna joined Thomas in the surveillance center. Ready to face her? Thomas straightened his tie, preparing to confront the woman who had orchestrated his end of life. Everything's recorded, McKenna said. The jury's going to love this. As Thomas ascended in the elevator to the penthouse, his thoughts churned over the long road leading here. Every step, every deception had been calculated to bring them to this moment. When the doors opened, Thomas stepped into a room of broken illusions. His marriage had ended, but justice had just begun. Months later, the federal courthouse buzzed with activity. The operation had made national headlines, and today marked the culmination of the trial. International crime ring, toppled corrupt real estate empire, exposed detective uncovers. Wife's homicide plot. Justice, at last, was served. In the courtroom, Thomas stepped into the witness stand, ready to give his final testimony. The evidence presented throughout the trial had been indisputable. Surveillance videos, financial ledgers, intercepted messages, and the meticulously documented homicide plot. But the prosecution wanted to close with an emotional punch, allowing Thomas to share, in his own words, the depth of the betrayal. Detective Reeves, the prosecutor began, can you describe the moment you first realized your wife's involvement in this conspiracy? Thomas let his gaze sweep across the courtroom, pausing briefly on Tori. She sat at the defense table, her polished image replaced by the stark reality of prison attire, her face bare and worn from months in custody. It wasn't the homicide plot that broke me, Thomas said, his voice firm but reflective. It was realizing that every moment of our 15 years together was a lie. Every anniversary, every holiday, every quiet evening at home, each one was just part of her act, a long rehearsal leading to my eventual removal. As he spoke, the courtroom screens displayed evidence, images of Tori and Petrov celebrating the supposed success of the homicide, videos of her practicing a grieving widow's speech, and documents revealing plans to use his end of life to funnel millions through fraudulent charities. The most egregious crime here isn't just the money laundering or the conspiracy to homicide, Thomas continued, his tone sharpening. It's the betrayal of trust, not just mine, but the trust of every honest citizen who relies on the integrity of our institutions. When criminals like Alexander Wade, better known as Anton Petrov, turn legitimate businesses into criminal fronts, they don't just steal money, they steal our faith in the system, in each other, and in the foundations of our society. The jury appeared riveted as Thomas explained how the investigation revealed Petrov's long-standing tactics. He would recruit morally ambiguous yet ambitious individuals, entangle them in increasingly illegal activities, and then let them take the fall once their usefulness ended. It was a pattern designed to protect him while expanding his empire. Later, Thomas sat with Grace in the courthouse cafeteria, both quietly watching news reports about the trial on a mounted television. The statistics were staggering. 13 fraudulent real estate schemes exposed, over $3 billion in assets recovered, dozens of conspirators facing prosecution. Grace slid a cup of coffee toward him, a small gesture that had become their unspoken tradition over the years. Quite a way to wrap up a marriage, she said, her tone light but understanding. Any second thoughts? Thomas considered the question as he watched a segment about Bethany Porter, one of the whistleblowers who had been instrumental in cracking the case. Now under witness protection, she was rebuilding her life, her bravery earning her a new chance at a future free of Petrov's influence. Just that I didn't figure it out sooner, Thomas replied after a pause. But sometimes you have to walk through the dark to really see the light. The broadcast shifted to McKenna, whose security firm had gained significant recognition and federal contracts following its involvement in the operation. He was giving an interview about strategies to prevent similar schemes. Meanwhile, Grace, newly promoted to lead the organized crime division, had already begun implementing innovative methods to detect and dismantle financial crimes on a national scale. Outside the courthouse, Boston's spring sunshine cast a golden glow on the streets below, promising renewal. Thomas watched pedestrians pass by, unaware of how close their communities had come to being overtaken by Petrov's sprawling corruption. When the verdicts were announced, they were unambiguous. Tori and Petrov were sentenced to multiple life terms. The precision and detail that had fueled their criminal enterprise ultimately became their downfall. Every staged moment, every premeditated step had been meticulously documented and turned against them in court. As Thomas exited the courthouse, he felt an unfamiliar lightness. The case had been transformative, painful but enlightening. He had learned hard lessons about trust, deception, and the masks people wear, but also about the enduring strength of loyalty, integrity, and the justice system's capacity for good. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, he paused to look back. What had ended here wasn't just his marriage, but an era of his life defined by betrayal. Endings, though, often mark the start of something new, and perhaps something better. At the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut, the sterile visitation room was a far cry from the luxurious penthouses Tori Reeves once called home. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on her face, highlighting the toll of incarceration. The sleek designer wardrobe and manicured image were long gone, replaced by the plain orange uniform of a federal inmate. 5 years in prison had stripped away her former glamour. Her hands, once adorned with sparkling rings, now rested bare on the scratched surface of the visitation table. Across from her sat Dr. Sarachun, a prison psychiatrist conducting research on psychological manipulation in white-collar crime. Tori's story had made her a prime subject. "Let's talk about where you are now," Dr. Sarachun began, pen hovering over her notepad. "Your appeal was denied last month. How are you coping with that?" Tori let out a bitter laugh, her voice echoing off the room's concrete walls. 25 to life, no parole, same as Petrov. She traced invisible patterns on the table. "He's in Florence, Supermax. Turns out the money laundering was just the tip of the iceberg. They tied him to arms dealing, human trafficking, the works." "And how do you view your role in his empire now?" "I was a fool," Tori admitted, her voice quieter than it once would have been. "I thought I was using him, leveraging his resources for my own gain. But the truth is, he was grooming me from the start. Every so-called investment in my business, every piece of advice, he knew exactly what he was doing." She leaned back in her chair, the weight of her mistakes evident. The ambition that once fueled her rise had become the very thing that dragged her down. In a high-security prison halfway across the country, Anton Petrov faced the bleak reality of his downfall. The empire he had meticulously built over decades had collapsed in a way he could never have imagined. What began as a federal investigation targeting 12 cities had unraveled operations spanning 27 cities and 3 continents. Authorities recovered not just $3 billion, but nearly $12 billion in illicit assets, exposing the vast scope of his criminal network. Meanwhile, in Boston's financial district, Grace Rodriguez leaned back in her chair, gazing out at the harbor that had been a silent witness to so many moments during the Petrov investigation. Her office, now part of the FBI's Real Estate and Financial Crimes Task Force, symbolized the progress made since those dark days. As the head of the newly formed unit, Grace had spearheaded a transformation in how financial crime was detected and dismantled. Lessons from the Petrov case became the foundation of a groundbreaking strategy, one that emphasized collaboration, technology, and foresight. "Director Rodriguez," her assistant's voice chimed over the intercom, "Colonel McKenna is here for your meeting." Grace stood as James Iron Jim McKenna walked in. His role in the Petrov case had catapulted his private security firm into the national spotlight, and now his expertise was indispensable to federal investigations. "Just back from Quantico," McKenna said, settling into a chair. "We're using the Petrov case as part of the curriculum. When I show the recruits how Thomas orchestrated the counter-operation, you can see the gears turning in their heads." Grace smiled, recalling the intensity of those days. "How's Thomas doing these days?" "He's thriving," McKenna replied, "running his own investigation firm in Colorado. He's got a knack for spotting financial fraud that most people can't even comprehend. His clients love him." After leaving the force, Thomas Reeves had established a private firm in Denver, specializing in uncovering corporate fraud and preventing insider threats. His book, Behind the Facade, Unmasking Corporate Fraud, had become a bestseller and a training staple for federal agents and private investigators alike. "And Bethany?" Grace asked, scrolling through her emails. "She just wrapped up her MBA at Stanford. Witness protection helped her rebuild her life, and now she's using her platform to advocate for whistleblowers. She's testifying before Congress next month." Bethany Porter's bravery had sparked a wave of change. Her testimony against Petrov's network had not only cracked the case, but also inspired others to come forward. Federal agencies had since implemented what they called the Porter Protocol, a set of best practices for protecting whistleblowers and leveraging their insights in high-stakes investigations. "What about the Morrison complex?" McKenna asked, accepting a coffee from Grace's assistant. "Completely repurposed," Grace said. "It's now a regional training center for law enforcement. They're using it to teach financial crime investigation techniques. Sometimes the best way to deal with darkness is to shine a spotlight right on it." Their conversation shifted to current cases, but Grace's mind lingered on the lasting impact of the Petrov case. Its revelations had forced a complete overhaul of Boston's real estate practices. New regulations, jokingly nicknamed the Reeves Reforms, required developers to disclose unprecedented levels of financial detail, ensuring no hidden players could operate in the shadows. In a modest diner in Dorchester, where Grace and Thomas had once shared countless early morning strategy sessions, a framed newspaper headline still hung prominently on the wall. "Boston detective cracks international crime syndicate," it declared in bold print. Betty, the ever-enthusiastic waitress, loved pointing it out to diners, proudly recounting how the two detectives used to brainstorm over coffee and omelets. The federal courthouse, now a frequent stop for law students, had become a case study in itself. The Petrov investigation was a cornerstone of criminal law classes, demonstrating the intersection of technology, law, and human psychology in modern prosecutions. Thomas rarely returned to Boston. Too many ghosts lingered in the city where his life had unraveled. Instead, he found peace in the Rockies, where his days were filled with meaningful work and the healing clarity of nature. Slowly, he had begun dating again, carefully rebuilding his personal life with the wisdom hard-won from his past mistakes. His last communication with Tori had come during her appeals process. She had written a letter, filled with apologies and pleas for understanding, but the words felt as hollow as their marriage had become. Thomas had chosen not to reply, letting silence convey the message better than words ever could. The funds recovered from Petrov's operation had been put to powerful use. A sufferer compensation program helped small businesses and families recover from financial devastation, while Thomas had dedicated his share of the forfeited assets to scholarships for children of fallen officers. It was his way of turning personal loss into something meaningful for others. Grace's phone buzzed, drawing her attention back to the present. Another case file awaited review. As she and McKenna pored over the details, she reflected on how the Petrov case had reshaped their lives and their field. "You know what Thomas always says," McKenna said, scanning the file. "The biggest scams don't hide in the shadows. They thrive in plain sight, cloaked in respectability." Grace smirked. "Speaking of scams, did you hear about the support group?" She was referring to a network formed by spouses and partners who had been blindsided by betrayal, much like Thomas had been. The group offered solace and strength, helping members heal while raising awareness about financial misuse and manipulation. Occasionally, Thomas would speak at their meetings, sharing his story to give others hope and a path forward. What began as a tangled web of lies and deception had left behind a legacy of truth and resilience. Though the shadows of Petrov's crimes still loomed, the light that followed was undeniable and lasting. From her office overlooking Boston Harbor, Grace pondered the far-reaching impact of the Petrov investigation. The criminal empire had been dismantled. Tori was paying the price for her choices, and countless lives had been irrevocably altered. Some broken beyond repair, others rebuilt stronger than before. In her cell at the high-security Danbury prison, Tori clung to a single relic from her past, an old photograph tucked away in her belongings. It showed her and Thomas standing side by side at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for her first real estate project. They were smiling, full of hope for the future. On sleepless nights, she would stare at the picture, trying to pinpoint the moment her ambition became a poison, warping her values until success mattered more than people. Meanwhile, in a stark supermax cell in Florence, Anton Petrov's thoughts ran a different course. Reflection wasn't in his nature. Even stripped of his empire and freedom, he remained calculating, planning how to exploit any crack in the system. Though his reach had been severely curtailed, his scheming mind refused to rest. In Colorado, Thomas stood on the deck of his mountain home, watching the sunset cast hues of gold and violet across the peaks. His phone buzzed, a text from Grace alerting him to another case, another opportunity to stop someone else from suffering the betrayal he had endured. He smiled faintly, realizing how far he'd come. Endings, he had learned, were often beginnings in disguise. A chance to build something better, grounded in truth and resilience. The betrayal that once shattered his life had become the catalyst for a new mission, protecting others from falling prey to the same kind of deceit. Exposing the truth had been his first step toward rebuilding his life, and now it fueled his work every day. As night settled over the country, from Boston to Colorado, Connecticut to Florence, the central figures in this saga lived out the consequences of their choices. Some were confined by steel bars, others by the lingering echoes of their own guilt or resolve. All bore the weight of the truths the case had unearthed and the lessons it had taught. The story of Thomas and Tori Reeves, of Anton Petrov's empire and its collapse, became more than a criminal investigation. It stood as a testament to the power of truth over deception, of justice over greed, and the remarkable ability of people to rebuild after betrayal. In his Denver office, Thomas kept a small plaque on his desk, a gift from Grace. Its simple inscription read, "From darkness, light." Every morning, as he sifted through new cases of corporate fraud and financial manipulation, the words reminded him of what mattered most, that even the deepest wounds could lead to transformation. The plaque was both a symbol of his past and a beacon for his future, a reminder that the fight for integrity was worth it. And so, the story reached its quiet conclusion. The conspirators remained locked away, their schemes dismantled. The investigators continued their work, inspired by what they had achieved. And Thomas, no longer just a detective but a guardian of truth, found purpose in his mountain sanctuary. His work now was to help others navigate the same dark paths he once traveled, ensuring they, too, could find their way back to the light. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected, but it was perhaps the one they had earned. Choices had been made and consequences faced. In the end, that was all anyone could ask for. The chance to grow from their mistakes, to rise above their circumstances, and to move forward with the hard-won clarity that comes from confronting the shadows. No matter how dark the journey, the path to the light was always there for those willing to walk it.